April 16th, 1945. 0727 hours. Radar Picket Station Number 1, 30 miles northwest of Okinawa. Quartermaster 2nd Class Aristides Footride set down his pencil in the logbook as the USS Laffey's radar operator reported a single contact approaching from the north. Range 12 miles. Speed 180 knots. Altitude 4,000 feet. The 19-year-old son of a Greek Orthodox pastor from Seattle reached for the sound-powered telephone. General quarters would sound in moments. What Footrides didn't know was that this single blip on the radar screen would trigger the most devastating kamikaze assault ever directed against a single American warship. In the next 80 minutes, the destroyer USS Laffey would face 22 Japanese aircraft in an attack so intense that naval historians would still struggle to explain how she survived. The Imperial Japanese Navy's Operation Kikusui, floating chrysanthemums, had mobilized over 3,000 aircraft for mass suicide attacks against the American fleet off Okinawa. Named after the emblem of the 14th century samurai Kusunoki Masashige, who chose death over surrender, these operations represented Japan's final desperate attempt to stop the American advance toward the home islands. 7 major Kikusui operations had already been launched. Hundreds of American ships had been damaged. Dozens had been sunk. But no ship had faced what the Laffey was about to endure. The USS Laffey cut through Pacific swells at 25 knots. Her Allen M. Sumner-class hull displacing 2,200 tons of seawater. Commander Frederick Julian Beckton stood on the bridge studying the tactical plot. His ship carried 336 men and an arsenal specifically designed for anti-aircraft warfare. 6 5-inch dual-purpose guns in 3 twin mounts, 12 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft cannons, 11 20mm Oerlikon cannons. The mathematics of survival were brutal. Traditional single-aircraft attacks achieved kill rates of less than 2% against properly defended destroyers. Mass kamikaze attacks had raised that percentage to 18.6%. But what was approaching Laffey would defy all statistical models. Beckton was no stranger to kamikaze attacks. As executive officer of the destroyer Aaron Ward, he had witnessed the first USS Laffey's destruction at Guadalcanal in November 1942, when she engaged the Japanese battleship Hiei at a range of 20 feet before being torn apart by 14-inch shells. 5 months later, as Aaron Ward's commander, Beckton watched his own ship sink under Japanese dive bombers. The Navy's decision to give him command of the second destroyer named Laffey seemed either ironic or prophetic. Under his relentless training regimen, the crew had achieved gunnery scores that ranked among the highest in the Pacific Fleet. They would need every fraction of that proficiency. Aboard the approaching Aichi D-3A Val dive bomber, the pilot checked his fuel gauge and bomb release mechanism. The 750-kilogram bomb beneath his fuselage was armed. His mission was reconnaissance, to probe American defenses and report back on ship positions. But the pilot had other intentions. Like thousands of Special Attack Corps volunteers, he had written his final letters home, drunk his ceremonial sake, and tied his Hachimaki headband bearing the rising sun. There would be no return flight to report intelligence. This would be a one-way mission. The American radar operators tracked the Val as it circled at 8,000 yards, just beyond effective gun range. In the Combat Information Center below the bridge, Lieutenant Lloyd Hull monitored the ship's sophisticated SK air search and SG surface search radar systems. The electronic eyes could detect aircraft at 60 miles and surface contacts at 22 miles. But technology had limitations. Low-flying aircraft could slip under the radar's coverage. Multiple simultaneous attacks could overwhelm operators' ability to track individual targets. And the newest Japanese tactic, using high-altitude decoys to draw away fighter cover while low-level attackers struck, had proven devastatingly effective. At 0730, the Val began its approach run. 5-inch Mount 51 swung to track the target. The gun captain, gunner's mate Lawrence Delowski, had drilled his crew until they could load, aim, and fire in under 3 seconds. The mount's radar-directed Mark 37 fire control system calculated range, speed, bearing, and altitude, adjusting for wind, ship movement, and barrel wear. The mechanical computer, a marvel of analog engineering, solved ballistic equations that would have taken human gunners minutes to calculate. But at this range, even with radar direction, hitting a maneuvering aircraft travelling at over 200 miles per hour required as much luck as skill. At 0744, the Val turned away without attacking. A probe, a test. Or perhaps the pilot had lost his nerve. But radar screens were already showing new contacts. Many contacts. The main attack force was approaching. Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, commander of the 5th Air Fleet on Kyushu, had authorized the launch of over 350 aircraft for Kikusui No. 3. Pilots had been briefed on priority targets. Radar picket destroyers that provided early warning for the main fleet. Destroy the pickets, and the carriers would be vulnerable. The tactical importance of Radar Picket Station No. 1 made Laffey the primary target. At 0827, Laffey's radar detected multiple groups of aircraft approaching from the north and northwest. Estimated 50-plus contacts. Commander Beckton immediately requested fighter support from the Combat Air Patrol. 4 F-6F Hellcats and 2 F-4U Corsairs were vectored toward the incoming raid, but they were 12 miles away and would need precious minutes to intercept. The two-plane cap assigned directly to Laffey had lost radio contact and was nowhere to be seen. The destroyer would face the initial assault alone. The first wave consisted of 4 Aichi D-3A Vals approaching in a coordinated attack pattern designed to overwhelm the ship's defences. 2 would attack from the bow, forcing the ship to turn and expose her beam to the other 2 attacking from the stern. It was a tactic perfected through 3 years of Pacific combat, refined through the sacrifice of hundreds of pilots who had learned what worked and what didn't. Their knowledge, transmitted back to training bases before their final missions, created a constantly evolving doctrine of suicide attack tactics. At 0830, the 4 Vals split into pairs and began their attack runs. Beckton ordered full speed and hard left rudder. The ship heeled sharply, her hull groaning under the stress of the emergency turn. The manoeuvre would bring more guns to bear on the attackers while presenting a narrower target profile. But it also meant the ship would be committed to a predictable course for crucial seconds. Mount 51 and 52, the forward 5-inch turrets, opened fire first. The distinctive crack of the 5-inch 38 caliber guns echoed across the water. Each shell contained a time delay fuse that would detonate the projectile at a predetermined range, creating a cloud of shrapnel designed to shred aircraft aluminum and kill pilots. The key was calculating the correct fuse timing. Too early and the shrapnel cloud would dissipate before reaching the target. Too late and the shell would pass harmlessly by. Fire Controlman, 2nd Class. Glenn Radder watched through his rangefinder as the first Val bore in from the starboard bow. At 2,000 yards, the 40mm guns joined the barrage. The Swedish-designed Bofors fired 2-pound explosive shells at a rate of 120 rounds per minute. The distinctive pom-pom-pom sound of the 40mm mixed with the boom of the 5-inch guns created a deafening cacophony that required gun crews to communicate through hand signals. At 1,000 yards, the 20mm Oerlikons opened fire. These Swiss-designed cannons could fire 450 rounds per minute, creating a virtual wall of lead and tracers. Gunner's mate 3rd Class Warren Walker, strapped into his 20mm mount, watched his tracers arc toward the incoming Val. The aircraft seemed to hang in the air, growing larger with terrifying slowness, despite its actual speed of over 200 miles per hour. Walker could see the pilot's face, the rising sun emblems on the wings, the bomb slung beneath the fuselage. The first Val shuddered under multiple 40mm hits. Pieces of aluminum skin and engine cowling flew off. The port wing separated at the root. The aircraft cartwheeled into the ocean 400 yards off the starboard beam, its bomb detonating on impact with the water and sending a geyser of spray over Laffey's forward guns. One down. The second Val, pressing its attack from the port bow, flew into a concentrated barrage from Mount 52. A 5-inch shell detonated directly beneath the aircraft, the shrapnel shredding the fuselage and killing the pilot instantly. The Val nosed over and crashed 300 yards to port. 2 down. The third Val, attacking from astern, released its bomb at 500 yards before multiple 20mm hits set it ablaze. The bomb splashed harmlessly 50 yards astern as the burning aircraft crashed into Laffey's wake. 3 down. The fourth Val made the mistake of approaching at a constant angle and altitude, making fire control calculations simple. Mount 53, the aft 5-inch turret under Chief Gunner's mate Wayne Schaffer, put 3 shells into the aircraft at 800 yards. The Val disintegrated in mid-air, raining debris across the ocean surface. 4 aircraft destroyed in 3 minutes. In the Combat Information Center, Lieutenant Hull marked the 4 kills on his plotting board, but the radar scope showed no respite. More aircraft were approaching, and the tactical situation was deteriorating. The 8-plane cap that had been providing high cover had been decoyed away by a group of Japanese fighters, leaving Laffey exposed. The 2-plane low cap was still out of radio contact. For the next critical minutes, the destroyer would have to depend entirely on her own guns. At 0839, the main body of the attack force arrived. Unlike the first wave's coordinated assault, these aircraft attacked in rapid succession from multiple directions, making it impossible for the ship's fire control systems to engage all targets effectively. The tactic, developed through careful analysis of American anti-aircraft procedures, was designed to overwhelm human decision-making capacity. Gun directors could only track one target at a time. Manual gun mounts required precious seconds to traverse to new targets. Ammunition handlers could only maintain maximum rate of fire for limited periods before exhaustion set in. The fifth attacker, a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber, approached from dead ahead at wave-top height, below the depression limits of the 5-inch guns. Beckton ordered emergency flank speed and hard right rudder, trying to unmask his aft batteries. The 20mm gunners forward fired desperately at the incoming aircraft, their tracers creating a lethal web of fire. The Judy pilot held his course, boring straight in despite taking multiple hits. At 100 yards, the pilot pulled up sharply, attempting to crash into the bridge. Quartermaster Footrides watched from the bridge wing as the Judy's propeller seemed to fill his entire field of vision. At the last second, the aircraft stalled. Whether from battle damage or pilot error would never be known. The Judy's wing clipped the port yard arm, spinning the aircraft around. It crashed into the water just 20 yards to port, its explosion showering the bridge with burning fuel and debris. Footrides felt the heat wash over him as he pressed himself against the bulkhead. Before the crew could recover, the 6th attacker was upon them. Another Judy, approaching from the starboard quarter at an angle that masked it from most of the ship's guns. Only Mount 53 and the aft 40mm could bear. The aircraft released its bomb at 300 yards. Beckton ordered hard left rudder, but the bomb struck anyway, penetrating the main deck between the stacks and exploding in the after-crew's quarters. The blast killed 2 men instantly and started fires that threatened the 40mm ammunition stored nearby. The 7th aircraft, a Val approaching from port, flew into a wall of fire from the port side 20mm. Seaman First Class Robert Carr, manning gun 23, held his trigger down despite his gun beginning to overheat. The sustained fire paid off. The Val's engine erupted in flames and the aircraft crashed close aboard to port. So close that burning gasoline splashed across Laffey's deck, starting new fires. The 8th attacker achieved complete surprise. A Nakajima B-5N Kate torpedo bomber, though carrying bombs rather than torpedoes, approached from astern hidden in the smoke from the previous attacks. The aircraft was almost on top of the ship before anyone spotted it. Gunner's mate Calvin Clower, manning a 40mm mount, swung his gun around desperately, but couldn't traverse fast enough. The Kate crashed into Mount 53, the aft 5-inch turret, at 0842. The impact was catastrophic. The Kate's 250-kilogram bomb detonated on contact, blowing the top off the turret and killing everyone inside, including Chief Schaffer and his entire gun crew. Burning aviation fuel poured through the shattered turret into the handling rooms below. The ready ammunition began cooking off, sending 5-inch shells rocketing randomly across the fantail. One shell punched through the deck and exploded in the steering gear room, jamming the rudder 26 degrees to port. Laffey began circling helplessly, locked in a left turn at 25 knots. Beckton immediately ordered the engines stopped, but momentum carried the ship through another complete circle before she slowed. The loss of steering couldn't have come at a worse time. 3 more aircraft were already beginning their attack runs. The 9th attacker, a Val, approached from the starboard beam. With the ship circling and Mount 53 destroyed, defensive fire was significantly reduced. The Val bore in, taking hits from the 40mm but maintaining its attack run. At the last second, defensive fire from the starboard 20mm cut the aircraft's control cables. The Val rolled inverted and crashed into the ocean just yards from the ship, its bomb detonating underwater and lifting Laffey's stern out of the water. The 10th aircraft almost ended Laffey's fight. Another Judy, approaching from astern where the destroyed Mount 53 could no longer provide defensive fire. With the rudder jammed and the ship still making slow circles, Beckton couldn't maneuver to unmask his remaining guns. The Judy released its bomb from 200 yards. The weapon struck the fantail, blowing an 8-by-10-foot hole in the deck and killing 6 men manning the after 20mm guns. Among the dead was signalman Bill Kelly, who had been attempting to rig an emergency steering system. It was 0845. In 13 minutes, Laffey had been hit by 2 bombs and 1 kamikaze. 6 more aircraft had been shot down just short of the ship, but the attack was far from over. Radar showed more aircraft approaching, and the ship's defensive capabilities were seriously degraded. Mount 53 was destroyed. The rudder was jammed. Fires burned in 3 locations. Ammunition was running low on several mounts. And casualties were mounting, already 15 dead and 26 wounded. The 11th attacker marked a turning point in the battle. A Val approached from the port bow, but this time Laffey wasn't alone. 4 Marine F-4U Corsairs from Marine Fighter Squadron 5MF 441, launched from Yontan Airfield on Okinawa, arrived just as the Val began its attack run. Captain Robert Klingman's Corsair caught the Val at 500 feet, his 650 caliber machine guns shredding the Japanese aircraft's tail section. The Val spiraled into the ocean. It was the first aircraft Laffey hadn't had to destroy herself, but the marine fighters couldn't be everywhere. The 12th attacker, a Judy approaching from the starboard quarter, slipped through while the Corsairs were engaged elsewhere. This kamikaze wouldn't miss. At 0847, the Judy crashed into the after-deck house between the stacks, its bomb penetrating the deck and exploding in the after engine room. The blast ruptured steam lines, filling the compartment with superheated vapour at 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Machinist's mate George Logan and 3 other men were literally cooked alive. The explosion also knocked out the afterfire room, reducing the ship's speed to 12 knots. Chief Machinist's mate George Weiss, in the forward engine room, felt the ship shudder from the impact. He knew from the sudden loss of steam pressure that the after engine room was gone. Working in temperatures exceeding 130 degrees, Weissy and his men struggled to maintain steam pressure to the forward engines. Without speed, Laffey would be a sitting duck. They had to keep the plant running no matter what. The 13th attacker appeared from nowhere, a twin-engine Yokosuka P-1Y Francis bomber approaching at high speed from dead astern. With Mount 53 destroyed and most of the aft 20mm knocked out, Laffey had almost no defence against attacks from that quarter. The Francis bored in, its pilot intending to crash into the bridge. At 200 yards, a Marine corsair piloted by Lieutenant Richard Kerstetter dove from above, firing a long burst into the France's starboard engine. The bomber yawed violently to the right, missing Laffey's stern by less than 10 feet before crashing into the ocean. The 14th aircraft nearly succeeded where others had failed. An Oscar fighter approaching from the port beam at maximum speed. The aircraft was moving so fast that gun directors couldn't track it effectively. Mount 51 managed to get off 3 rounds, but they all missed. The Oscar's pilot aimed for the bridge, clearly trying to decapitate the ship's command structure. At the last second, gunner's mate second class Robert Fenwick, manning a portside 40mm mount, achieved a lucky hit on the Oscar's tail. The aircraft yawed left, its wing clipping the ship's mast and shearing off the port yard arm, along with the American flag. The Oscar crashed close aboard to port. At 0848, there was a brief respite. No aircraft were visible, though radar showed more approaching from the north. Beckton used the momentary break to assess damage. The reports were grim. Mount 53 destroyed with all hands, steering control lost, after engine room flooded, multiple fires burning, 32 dead and counting, over 50 wounded, ammunition running low on several mounts, and still more aircraft approaching. Lieutenant Frank Manson, the ship's communications officer, asked Beckton if they should prepare to abandon ship. Beckton's response would become legendary. "Hell no, Frank. We still have guns that can shoot. I'll never abandon ship as long as a gun will fire." Nearby, a lookout muttered under his breath, adding his own postscript to the captain's words. "And if I can find one man to fire it." The 15th attacker ended the brief respite. Another Val, approaching from high altitude directly out of the sun, the classic attack angle, used since the beginning of aerial warfare. The sun's glare made it impossible for lookouts to spot the aircraft until it was already in its dive. The Val released its bomb from 1,000 feet. Beckton ordered hard right rudder, forgetting momentarily that steering control was lost. The bomb struck the water 10 yards to port, the explosion sending shrapnel through the ship's hull and wounding 4 more men. The 16th aircraft was a Mitsubishi G-4M Betty bomber, far larger than the single-engine attackers Laffey had faced so far. The twin-engine bomber approached from the starboard beam at 200 feet, too low for the 5-inch guns to engage. Every 40 and 20mm gun that could bear opened fire. The Betty's size made it an easier target, but it could also absorb more damage. Tracers poured into the bomber's fuselage and wings. One engine burst into flames, then the other. Still the Betty came on. At 300 yards, the Betty's pilot released 2 bombs. Both missed, straddling the ship, but the bomber itself, now fully engulfed in flames, continued straight at Laffey. At the last second, the aircraft's left wing dipped. Whether from control failure or the pilot's death would never be known. The Betty passed directly over Mount 52, so close that the 5-inch gun crew ducked. The bomber crashed into the ocean on the port side, its burning wreckage skipping across the water like a flaming stone. The 17th attacker achieved what others hadn't, a direct hit on one of Laffey's main gun mounts. An Oscar fighter, approaching from ahead at high speed, released a bomb that struck Mount 52 squarely. The explosion didn't penetrate the turret's armour, but the concussion killed 3 men inside and wounded 5 others, including the mount captain. The turret was out of action, reducing Laffey's forward firepower by half. By 0850, Laffey was in desperate condition. Only Mount 51 remained fully operational of the 3 5-inch mounts. Half the 40mm guns were destroyed or damaged. Most of the 20mm were out of action. Fires burned out of control aft. The ship was making only 8 knots, circling helplessly with her jammed rudder, and radar showed more aircraft approaching. The 18th attacker should have finished Laffey. A Val approaching from the perfect angle, dead astern where the ship had no remaining defences. But as the Val lined up for its attack run, two Marine corsairs dove from above. Captain Floyd Kirkpatrick and Lieutenant Robert Cowden caught the Val in a crossfire, their combined 24-50 caliber machine guns literally disintegrating the Japanese aircraft. The kill was so close to Laffey that debris from the Val landed on the destroyer's deck. The 19th aircraft was another Judy, approaching from the port quarter. By now, Laffey's gun crews were exhausted. They had been firing continuously for over 20 minutes. Gun barrels were overheating. Ammunition was running dangerously low. Several guns had jammed from the sustained rate of fire. The Judy bore in, taking hits but maintaining its attack run. At 100 yards, the pilot pulled up, trying to crash into the bridge from above. A lucky burst from gun mount 44 caught the Judy's wing root. The aircraft rolled right and crashed into the ocean just yards from the ship. At 0851, the 20th attacker arrived, another Val approaching from starboard. This pilot had learned from watching his comrades die. He approached at varying altitudes and angles, jinking constantly to throw off the gunner's aim. The few operational guns that could bear fired desperately, but their accuracy was suffering from exhaustion and battle damage. The Val released its bomb from 300 yards. The weapon struck the water close aboard, the explosion sending more shrapnel into Laffey's already perforated hull. The 21st aircraft nearly accomplished what 20 others had failed to do. Another Judy, hidden in the smoke from Laffey's fires, approached from astern completely undetected. The first warning was the roar of its engine as it passed over the fantail at 50 feet. The Judy released its bomb at point-blank range. The weapon struck the deck just forward of the destroyed Mount 53, penetrating into the after-ammunition handling room before exploding. The blast was catastrophic. 5-inch ammunition began detonating in chain reaction. The after part of the ship erupted in flame and smoke. Shrapnel scythed through the damage control parties trying to fight the fires. Among the dead was Ensign Robert Thompson, who had left his station in the Combat Information Centre to lead a repair party. He would receive a posthumous Navy Cross for his sacrifice. The explosion also ruptured the fire mains, cutting water pressure to the after part of the ship. Without water to fight the fires, damage control parties resorted to throwing burning debris overboard by hand. Men wrapped rags around their hands and grabbed red-hot shell casings, hurling them over the side. Others used their bodies to smother flames, rolling on the deck to extinguish burning clothing. The 22nd and final attacker was a Val, approaching from the port bow at 0853. By this time, Laffey was barely fighting back. Only Mount 51 and a handful of automatic weapons remained in action. The ship was dead in the water, burning furiously aft, listing to port from flooding. Commander Beckton watched the Val approach, knowing his ship had little left to stop it. But Laffey wasn't alone. 4 Navy F-6F. Hellcats from Fighter Squadron 10, finally arriving from the carrier Intrepid, caught the Val at 1,000 yards. Lieutenant John Mitchell's Hellcat pumped hundreds of rounds into the Val's engine. The aircraft burst into flames and crashed into the ocean 500 yards from Laffey. The attack was over. In 80 minutes, USS Laffey had faced 22 aircraft in the most concentrated kamikaze attack of the Pacific War. 6 kamikazes had crashed into the ship. 4 bombs had scored direct hits. The destroyer had been strafed repeatedly. Yet somehow, impossibly, she remained afloat. 32 men were dead, 71 wounded. The ship was a burning, flooding wreck. But she had survived. The mathematics were staggering. Of the 22 attackers, Laffey's guns had shot down 8. Marine and Navy fighters had destroyed another 8. 6 had crashed into the ship or scored bomb hits. Never before or after would a single ship face such concentrated kamikaze attacks and survive. Statistical models suggested the probability of survival was less than 1%. Yet Laffey had beaten those odds through a combination of superior training, innovative tactics, raw courage, and perhaps a measure of luck. Executive Officer Lieutenant Commander Charles Holovac would later analyse the attack with mathematical precision. The average interval between aircraft attacks was 3 minutes and 38 seconds. The longest gap was 8 minutes. The shortest was 45 seconds. At the peak of the assault, Laffey was engaging a new attacker every 90 seconds for nearly 15 minutes straight. No ship in naval history had sustained such intensive attacks and survived. The technological factors were equally significant. Laffey's Mark 37 gun directors, with their sophisticated analog computers, had enabled the 5-inch guns to engage targets with unprecedented accuracy. The proximity-fused shells, a secret weapon that detonated automatically when near an aircraft, had dramatically increased hit probability. The Beaufort's 40mm guns, with their high rate of fire and explosive shells, had provided crucial middle-layer defense. Even the humble 20mm Oerlikons, though often criticized as inadequate, had shot down several attackers at close range. But technology alone didn't save Laffey. The human factor was decisive. Commander Beckton's tactical brilliance in maneuvering his damaged ship. The gun crews who continued firing even as their shipmates died around them. The damage control parties who fought fires with their bare hands. The engineers who kept the plant running in hellish conditions. The radar operators who tracked multiple targets through smoke and confusion. Every man who stayed at his post when every instinct screamed to seek cover. The Japanese had committed their best pilots and aircraft to the attack. These weren't the inexperienced Toko volunteers of late 1945, given a few hours of flight training before their final mission. These were skilled aviators who had chosen death over defeat. Their tactical coordination, particularly in the early stages of the attack, showed sophisticated understanding of American defensive capabilities. The use of smoke and sun glare for concealment, the multi-axis attacks to overwhelm fire control, the targeting of command and control structures. These tactics would be studied and incorporated into post-war naval aviation doctrine. The immediate tactical impact was significant. The loss of Laffey from radar picket station number 1 created a gap in the early warning network protecting the invasion fleet. But her survival sent a more important message. If a single destroyer could survive 22 kamikaze attacks, then the Japanese strategy of trading lives for ships was failing. The mathematics of attrition that had seemed to favor Japan, thousands of aircraft versus hundreds of ships, was being negated by American defensive capabilities and damage control expertise. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, commander of amphibious forces at Okinawa, would later state that Laffey's survival was the single most important factor in maintaining fleet morale during the height of the kamikaze offensive. If she could survive such an attack, any ship could. The psychological impact on American sailors, who had begun to dread radar picket duty as a death sentence, was immeasurable. The Japanese reaction was equally telling. Radio intercepts revealed that the failure to sink Laffey despite the unprecedented concentration of attackers caused serious morale problems among Special Attack Corps pilots. If 22 aircraft couldn't sink a single destroyer, how many would it take to sink a battleship or carrier? The mathematical equation that justified kamikaze tactics, one pilot and plane for one enemy ship, was proven false. Vice Admiral Ugaki, reviewing the after-action reports, realized the implications. His diary entry for April 16th noted, "Despite the brave sacrifice of our special attack warriors, the enemy destroyer survived. This shows the limitations of body crash tactics against well-defended targets. We must reconsider our approach." Within weeks, Japanese tactics shifted toward attacking transports and supply ships, rather than heavily armed warships, a tacit admission that the kamikaze strategy had reached its limits. The technological lessons were immediately incorporated into American naval construction. The Allen M. Sumner-class destroyers like Laffey, with their twin 5-inch mounts and heavy anti-aircraft batteries, became the template for post-war destroyer design. The effectiveness of proximity-fused ammunition was definitively proven. The importance of redundant damage control systems was validated. Every major navy in the world studied Laffey's action report, incorporating its lessons into their own doctrines. But perhaps the most important lesson was human. In an age of increasing technological sophistication, when mechanical computers and radar systems were revolutionizing warfare, the survival of USS Laffey proved that the human element remained decisive. Training, leadership, courage, and determination could overcome seemingly impossible odds. The same qualities that had enabled wooden ships to defeat iron ones, that had allowed David to defeat Goliath, still mattered in the age of radar and guided weapons. The repair statistics told their own story. Laffey required 4 months in dry dock to repair the battle damage. Over 300 tons of damaged steel were cut away and replaced. The entire after section of the ship was essentially rebuilt. The cost exceeded $3 million, more than a third of the ship's original construction cost. But the Navy considered it money well spent. Laffey had proven that American ships could take unprecedented punishment and survive. The human cost was sobering, but not devastating. 32 dead from a crew of 336, less than 10% killed despite the ship being hit by 6 kamikazes and 4 bombs. This survival rate was attributed to several factors: Beckton's emphasis on damage control training, the crew's experience from previous combat operations, the design of the Alan M. Sumner-class, with better armour and compartmentalization than earlier destroyers, and perhaps most importantly, the extraordinary performance of the ship's medical team under Dr. Matthew Darnell, who continued operating on wounded even as bombs exploded around him. Individual acts of heroism were too numerous to fully catalogue. Gunner's mate Lawrence Delowski, who remained at his post in Mount 51 despite shrapnel wounds, personally accounting for 3 of the 8 aircraft shot down. Machinist's mate George Wise, who kept the forward engines running despite temperatures that literally blistered paint off bulkheads. Quartermaster Ari Futrides, who maintained the ship's log throughout the battle, providing the detailed record that would allow historians to reconstruct events. Seaman Calvin Clower, who manned a 40mm gun after its entire crew was killed, shooting down one attacker before being wounded himself. The story of Lieutenant T.W. Runk deserved special mention. As damage control officer, Runk had perhaps the most dangerous job during the attack. Moving through the ship to assess damage, he discovered an unexploded bomb on deck, a 250-kilogram weapon that had failed to detonate. Without hesitation, Runk picked up the bomb and threw it overboard. The weapon exploded seconds after hitting the water, close enough that shrapnel peppered the ship's hull. Had it detonated on deck, the damage might have been fatal. The supporting ships at Radar Picket Station No. 1 also played crucial roles. LCS-L 51, commanded by Lieutenant Howell Chickering, was credited with shooting down 6 aircraft and would receive a Presidential Unit citation. Her gunfire support during the height of the attack, when Laffey's own guns were being knocked out, was instrumental in the destroyer's survival. LCSL 116 rescued 22 Laffey sailors who had been blown overboard, many severely burned. Without their swift action, the death toll would have been significantly higher. The fighter pilots who eventually arrived also deserved recognition. Marine Captain Floyd Kirkpatrick was credited with 3 kills. Navy Lieutenant John Mitchell got 2. Their arrival at the critical moment when Laffey's defences were nearly exhausted probably saved the ship. The failure of the original Cap to provide coverage, they had been decoyed away by Japanese fighters, would lead to significant changes in fighter direction doctrine. Never again would radar picket destroyers be left without continuous fighter cover. The broader implications for the Pacific War were profound. Operation Kikusui had committed over 300 aircraft to attacks on April 16th. The loss of 22 aircraft to achieve only moderate damage to a single destroyer was an unacceptable exchange rate. Japan had approximately 3,000 operational aircraft remaining. At this rate of exchange, they would be exhausted long before inflicting decisive damage on the invasion fleet. The mathematical equation was inexorable. The American response was swift and decisive. Admiral Chester Nimitz, reviewing Laffey's action report, ordered immediate changes to radar picket procedures. Destroyers would no longer operate singly, but in mutually supporting groups. Fighter coverage would be continuous and multi-layered. Emergency repair ships would be stationed closer to picket stations. These changes, implemented within days, dramatically reduced losses during subsequent Kikusui operations. The Japanese also drew lessons, though they were largely negative. The concentration of attacks on a single ship had failed to achieve decisive results, while sacrificing irreplaceable pilots and aircraft. Future operations would employ more dispersed tactics, attacking multiple targets simultaneously to prevent concentration of defensive fire. But this dispersal also reduced the probability of achieving decisive damage to any single target. It was a tactical paradox with no good solution. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, would later admit that the failure to sink Laffey marked a turning point in Japanese naval strategy. The kamikaze had been Japan's last hope to inflict enough damage to make the Americans reconsider invasion. If maximum effort couldn't sink a single destroyer, there was no hope of stopping the vast invasion fleet assembled for Operation Downfall. The atomic bombs that ended the war 4 months later merely punctuated a conclusion that was already evident. The long-term impact on naval warfare doctrine was revolutionary. The action definitively proved that surface ships could survive mass air attacks if properly equipped and trained. This would influence Cold War naval construction, with ships designed around layered air defense systems. The Aegis combat system, with its ability to track and engage multiple targets simultaneously, was a direct descendant of the lessons learned off Okinawa. Every modern warship's emphasis on point defense weapons and damage control can trace its lineage back to Laffey's desperate fight. The human legacy was equally enduring. Laffey's crew formed one of the most active veteran associations in naval history, holding reunions for over 60 years. Their motto, "We who survived," spoke not just to their physical survival, but to the psychological burden of being among the few to face such an attack and live. Many crew members suffered what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, though the term didn't exist in 1945. The Navy's modern understanding of combat stress and its treatment owes much to studying survivors like Laffey's crew. Commander Beckton would go on to become a rear admiral, his tactical innovations during the kamikaze attack studied at naval war colleges worldwide. His memoir, The Ship That Would Not Die, became required reading at Annapolis, but Beckton always insisted that credit belonged to his crew. In a 1975 interview he stated, "I gave the orders, but those boys carried them out. They're the ones who saved the ship. Any commander would have been proud to lead such men." The ship herself would serve for another 30 years, participating in the Korean War and Cold War operations before decommissioning in 1975. Unlike most decommissioned destroyers, which were scrapped or used as target practice, Laffey was preserved as a memorial. Since 1982, she has been moored at Patriots Point Naval Museum in South Carolina, where visitors can walk her decks and see the battle damage still visible in her hull. The aft 5-inch mount, Mount 53, was never repaired, remaining as a memorial to the 6 men who died there. Modern naval historians still debate how Laffey survived when statistics said she shouldn't have. Some point to the mathematical improbability of her survival as evidence of divine intervention. Others cite the cumulative effect of small advantages, superior training, innovative tactics, technological edge, that together created an unlikely but not impossible outcome. The truth probably lies somewhere between. War has always been the realm where preparation meets chaos, where human will confronts mechanical probability. What cannot be debated is the courage displayed that day. Japanese pilots who chose death over defeat, American sailors who stood their ground against overwhelming odds, young men on both sides who believed their cause worth dying for. The tragedy of war is that such courage is expended in mutual destruction rather than creation. The lesson of war is that such courage exists in ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. In the pre-dawn darkness of April 16, 1945, USS Laffey had been just another destroyer on radar picket duty. By noon, she had become legend. The ship that would not die. The destroyer that faced 22 kamikazes and survived. Her story would inspire generations of sailors, proving that with enough courage, training, and determination, even the impossible becomes possible. The final entry in Laffey's deck log for April 16, 1945, written by Quartermaster Footrides as the ship limped toward Karama Retto for emergency repairs, was characteristically understated. Sustained multiple enemy air attacks, ship damaged but operational, proceeding to base. Behind those clinical words lay 80 minutes of hell, 32 dead shipmates, and a story of survival that would echo through naval history. The war would end in 4 months. The kamikaze attacks would claim many more ships and lives before Japan's surrender. But never again would a single ship face such concentrated assault. Never again would the Japanese achieve such tactical coordination. And never again would the outcome be in doubt. Laffey had proven that American ships could take the worst the enemy could deliver and survive. In proving that, she had helped win the war. Today, the lessons of USS Laffey remain relevant. In an age of missile warfare and cyber attacks, when military theorists speak of single devastating strikes that can eliminate major combatants, Laffey stands as a reminder that wars are still won by people, not just technology. That training and preparation can overcome numerical disadvantage. That courage and determination can triumph over seemingly impossible odds. And that sometimes, against all probability and prediction, the ship that should not survive does exactly that. The mathematics of war are not always destiny. Sometimes they are merely the odds to be overcome. March 6, 1944. 8th Air Force Headquarters, England. The Mission Briefing Room. Chalk scraped across blackboard as weather officers marked wind speeds and cloud formations over Berlin. Target, Reich Air Ministry. Expected opposition, severe. Colonel Hubert Zemke studied the tactical map and reached for the secure telephone. 48 Republic P-47 Thunderbolts would escort the bomber stream. The 56th Fighter Group, the 61st Squadron, the 62nd Squadron. What none of them knew was that this single mission would demonstrate the most devastating combination of survivability and firepower in aerial combat history. The European Air War had taught American forces that fighters were not just weapons of attack. They were shields. Break those shields and entire bomber formations would perish. The Luftwaffe's Jagdgeschwader 2 and Jagdgeschwader 26 had established defensive sectors stretching from the Channel coast to Berlin. Elite squadrons positioned to intercept any American penetration of German airspace. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s flown by experts with years of combat experience. The P-47 Thunderbolt roared through English skies at 350 miles per hour. Its massive frame displacing more air than any single-engine fighter ever built. 8 tons of armour, ammunition and engineering. Lieutenant Robert Johnson stood on the wing studying his aircraft's battle damage from the previous mission. His fighter carried armour plating behind the pilot, self-sealing fuel tanks, and an arsenal specifically designed to destroy anything in its path. 8 Browning M 2.50 caliber machine guns, each capable of firing 800 rounds per minute. 5-inch high-velocity rockets mounted under reinforced wings and suspended beneath the fuselage. The component that would make aviation history, a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double-wasp radial engine producing 2,000 horsepower. The R2800 represented American engineering at its most robust. Unlike liquid-cooled engines that failed with a single coolant leak, the radial engine could lose entire cylinders and continue running. Each of the 18 cylinders displaced 155.7 cubic inches. The mathematics were brutal. German 20mm cannon shells that would destroy a Messerschmitt's cooling system merely damaged individual cylinders on the Thunderbolt. The P-47 achieved survival rates that seemed impossible. Traditional fighters lost in combat at rates exceeding 10% per mission. The Thunderbolt lost 0.7%. Executive Officer Gerald Johnson had studied those statistics until they were burned into his memory. West Point educated with a mind for tactical analysis and mechanical systems. Johnson understood that aerial combat was ultimately about energy management, altitude converting to speed at 32 feet per second squared, target tracking calculations, deflection shooting. The difference between a hit and a miss often came down to understanding physics and exploiting mechanical advantages. Aboard Focke-Wulf FW 190A-5, Black 3, Oberstleutnant Egon Meyer reviewed his ammunition loadout. 2 MG-151/20 cannons with 250 rounds each, 2 MG-17 machine guns with 1,000 rounds each, armor-piercing and high-explosive shells mixed in precise ratios. 102 previous victories had taught him that American bombers required specific attack angles and ammunition management, but the new escort fighters presented different challenges. Intelligence reports described the P-47 as heavily armoured, difficult to destroy, requiring concentrated fire to critical components. Meyer had developed the head-on attack technique against B-17 formations. 4 to 5 20mm hits would destroy a bomber from the frontal aspect. 20 hits required from other angles. The mathematics of destruction calculated through 3 years of combat experience, but the P-47s absorbed damage that defied those calculations. Pilots returned with aircraft containing over 200 bullet holes, engines missing cylinders, control surfaces shredded, wings punctured by cannon shells. The American formations assembled over East Anglia. 3 squadron strength search patterns as they climbed toward escort altitude. USS George equivalent formations to port, USS Rabbi equivalent formations to starboard, the 56th Fighter Group in the center. Each Thunderbolt swept the sky with Mark IV gun sights and carefully calibrated weapon systems. The pilots worked in 4 ship flights, their training refined through months of combat. Stop every few degrees, check blind spots, scan for contrails. The weather was clear, conditions ideal for long-range visual acquisition. Temperature minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit at altitude, contrails inevitable above 25,000 feet. At 9:15 on March 6th, Johnson's flight spotted the enemy formation. 16 Focke-Wulf 190s climbing from the east, bearing 090 degrees relative. He pressed the radio transmit button and adjusted his gun switches. Bandits, 3 o'clock high, 16 plus closing fast. In Meyer's cockpit, the fighter controller's voice crackled through the radio. Achtung, Indiana approaching section Anton Bertha. Heavy escorts accompanying bomber stream. Meyer ordered an immediate combat climb. Full throttle, emergency boost engaged. The BMW 801 radial engine screamed as methanol water injection increased power to 2,100 horsepower. Climb rate 3,300 feet per minute. Time to combat altitude 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Executive Officer Gerald Johnson plotted the intercept geometry on his knee pad. Enemy speed estimated at 350 miles per hour. Closure rate approximately 600 miles per hour. Altitude advantage currently 2,000 feet to the Germans. The Thunderbolt's critical altitude was 30,000 feet, where the turbo supercharger gave maximum advantage, but engagement would occur at 27,000 feet, where both aircraft types performed effectively. The first engagement came at 0923. 8 P-47s dove from 29,000 feet in a carefully calculated bounce designed to convert altitude into speed and surprise. The Thunderbolts accelerated past 450 miles per hour in their dive. Armor-piercing incendiary tracers streaked through the morning sky. No hits on the initial pass. Clean miss. The Germans had broken at the exact moment, using their superior roll rate to evade. Gerald Johnson adjusted his calculations. The enemy reaction time was faster than expected, probably 2 seconds from visual acquisition to evasive action. He ordered a different approach angle and prepared for the second attack. At 9:31, the second bounce scored multiple hits. Concentrated fire from 4 thunderbolts hammered a Focke-Wulf's engine cowling. Black smoke trailed from the damaged fighter, but the pilot retained control. Johnson could see the German fighter's propeller still turning, the aircraft still maneuverable despite obvious damage. The BMW 801 radial engine proving nearly as robust as the American R-2800. The third attack came at 9:35. Johnson had calculated the deflection angle at 30 degrees, but wind drift at altitude affected bullet trajectories. The streaming fire passed behind the target. Meyer's wingman had executed a defensive barrel roll at the precise moment, using the Focke-Wulf's superior roll rate of 160 degrees per second. Standard evasion tactics that had kept Luftwaffe pilots alive throughout the defensive campaign. The fourth attack succeeded when Lieutenant Walter Beckham caught a Focke-Wulf in a climbing turn. 8 machine guns concentrated on the enemy fighter for a 3-second burst. 400 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition hammered the German aircraft. The Focke-Wulf's wing route failed. The aircraft entered an unrecoverable spin. No parachute observed. At 9:42, Meyer led his swarm in a head-on attack against Johnson's flight. Closing speed over 600 miles per hour. Time in effective gun range less than 2 seconds. Both formations opened fire at 800 yards. Tracers crisscrossed in the morning sky. Johnson's P-47 shuddered as 20mm cannon shells struck home. 3 hits in the engine cowling, 2 hits in the right wing, 1 hit in the tail section, oil pressure dropping, cylinder head temperature rising, but the engine continued running. The massive R-2800 double Wasp had absorbed damage that would have destroyed any other fighter. 2 cylinders were damaged, compression lost, but 16 cylinders continued firing. Oil leaked from punctured lines, but redundant systems maintained pressure. The turbocharger, protected by armor plating and mounted in the rear fuselage, remained undamaged. Johnson reduced power to 75% and turned for home. 20 minutes later, Johnson landed at Halesworth. Ground crews counted 43 bullet holes and 5 cannon strikes. The aircraft would fly again after 2 days of repairs. The pilot was uninjured. The mission had demonstrated the fundamental truth of the P-47's design philosophy. Survivability through redundancy, power through excess capacity, victory through mechanical superiority. But the broader tactical implications were just beginning to emerge. On June 26, 1943, the 56th Fighter Group had encountered Jagdgeschwader 26 over France. 48 Thunderbolts against 16 Focke-Wulfs. The mathematics seemed to favour the Americans, but experience and position gave the Germans critical advantages. What followed would become the most famous demonstration of P-47 survivability in aviation history. Lieutenant Robert Johnson flew as tail-end Charlie in the 61st Squadron formation. The most vulnerable position assigned to newer pilots as part of their combat education. His P-47C-2-RE, serial number 41-6235, carried the name Half Pint on its cowling. Standard armament of 8.50 caliber machine guns with 350 rounds per gun. The formation flew at 26,000 feet, approaching Forges-les-Eaux when German fighters struck from above and behind. The first indication of attack came from exploding ammunition. 21 20mm cannon shells ripped through Johnson's fuselage in the first 2 seconds. The instrument panel exploded. The canopy shattered. Hydraulic fluid sprayed into the cockpit. A cannon shell fragment sliced across Johnson's nose. Machine gun bullets punctured the oxygen system. Fire erupted behind the engine cowling as fuel lines ruptured. Johnson's P-47 rolled inverted and entered a spin. Centrifugal force pressed him against the canopy. The altimeter unwound through 20,000 feet, 15,000 feet, 10,000 feet. Standard recovery procedure: opposite rudder, forward stick, neutral ailerons. No response. The fire spread along the fuselage. Ammunition began cooking off in the wing magazines. At 4,000 feet, the fire suddenly extinguished. Fuel starvation or oxygen depletion at lower altitude. The spin stopped. Johnson regained marginal control. The canopy release mechanism had been destroyed by cannon fire. The plexiglass was partially melted, trapping Johnson inside. Manual escape impossible. The engine ran rough, missing on multiple cylinders, but maintained power. Oil covered the forward windscreen. Forward visibility 0. Peripheral vision limited to gaps in the shattered side panels. Navigation by magnetic compass impossible, the instrument destroyed. Johnson turned west toward the channel, flying by instinct and sun position. Altitude 1,000 feet. Airspeed unknown, the indicator destroyed. Engine temperature unknown, gauges shattered. Fuel quantity unknown, though fuel leaked steadily from multiple punctures. The English Channel lay 50 miles distant. German territory below. Anti-aircraft positions along the coast. Fighter bases at Abbeville and Poix. The probability of reaching England seemed minimal. Then Johnson spotted the worst possible sight. A Focke-Wulf FW-190 approaching from behind. Blue and yellow nose marking. The aircraft of an expertise. Johnson was defenseless. His gun sight was destroyed. Hydraulic pressure 0, meaning no gun charging capability even if the weapons functioned. Speed approximately 200 miles per hour, barely above stalling. The German fighter positioned for the killing shot. The FW-190 opened fire at 300 yards. Machine gun bullets hammered Johnson's P-47. The sound was overwhelming, metal shrieking as bullets punched through aluminum. The armor plate behind Johnson's seat rang like a bell as rounds struck it repeatedly. Fabric shredded, control cables frayed. The instrument panel, already destroyed, disintegrated further. Johnson hunched forward, making himself as small as possible behind the armor plate. The German pilot, later identified in some accounts as Egon Meyer, though this remains disputed, fired precise bursts. Professional, methodical shooting. The FW-190's ammunition loadout included 1,000 rounds of 7.92mm for the machine guns. The 20mm cannons had apparently been expended in earlier combat. For 3 minutes, the German fighter methodically pumped bullets into the crippled Thunderbolt. Short bursts to conserve ammunition, aimed shots at critical components, engine cowling, wing roots, control surfaces, fuel tanks. Johnson's P-47 absorbed the punishment and continued flying. The R2800 engine, despite running on 14 cylinders, maintained power. The control surfaces, though shredded, still responded to input. The self-sealing fuel tanks, though punctured multiple times, prevented catastrophic fuel loss. The German pilot pulled alongside Johnson's aircraft. Through the shattered canopy, Johnson could see the enemy pilot examining the Thunderbolt. The German shook his head in apparent disbelief. No aircraft should still be flying after absorbing such damage. The FW-190 dropped back for another attack run. More machine gun fire raked the Thunderbolt. Bullets walked across the wings, fuselage and tail section. The elevator trim tabs were shot away. The rudder was holed repeatedly. The ailerons were punctured. Still, the P-47 flew. The German pilot pulled alongside again. He appeared to be out of ammunition or had given up trying to destroy the seemingly indestructible American fighter. The German pilot looked directly at Johnson, rocked his wings in what might have been a salute, then turned back toward France. Johnson crossed the English Channel at 500 feet altitude, the engine running rougher, power fading, oil pressure near 0. The English coast appeared through the oil-smeared windscreen. RAF Manston lay 10 miles inland. Johnson had no radio, no instruments, no way to signal his condition. He approached the field at minimum altitude, hoping someone would recognize an aircraft in distress. The landing was more controlled crash than landing. No flaps, hydraulics destroyed, no brakes for the same reason. The main gear, locked down by emergency extension, held. The Thunderbolt rolled the entire length of the runway before grinding to a stop. Fire crews and medical personnel surrounded the aircraft. They could not open the canopy. Cannon damage had jammed the mechanism permanently. They used fire axes to chop through the plexiglass. Johnson climbed out, covered in hydraulic fluid, blood from minor wounds and oil. He walked around his aircraft and attempted to count the bullet holes. He stopped counting at 200 on just one side of the fuselage. Later, analysis revealed at least 21 20mm cannon strikes and over 200 machine gun bullet holes. One cannon shell had passed through the armor plate behind Johnson's seat without detonating, leaving a perfect 20mm hole, half an inch to either side, and Johnson would have been killed. The aircraft, Half Pint, was written off as destroyed, irreparable. But Johnson flew again 4 days later in a new P-47. He would eventually score 27 aerial victories, becoming one of America's highest-scoring aces in Europe. His survival on June 26, 1943, became legendary among P-47 pilots, proof that their aircraft could absorb damage beyond rational calculation and still bring them home. The psychological impact on Luftwaffe pilots was significant. Intelligence reports intercepted by Allied monitoring stations revealed growing concern among German pilots about American superfighters that seemed impossible to destroy. The term Betonflugzeug, concrete aircraft, appeared in German pilot reports. Luftwaffe training manuals were revised to emphasize attacking P-47s only with concentrated 20mm cannon fire aimed at specific vulnerable points: the turbo supercharger intake, the oil cooler, the cockpit. But even these tactics proved marginally effective. Captain Fred Christensen of the 62nd Squadron survived 47 bullet holes and 6 20mm cannon strikes on July 29, 1943. Lieutenant Ralph Johnson flew home with an entire cylinder shot off his engine on August 17th. Captain Walker Mahurin landed with his P-47 resembling Swiss cheese after combat on October 4th, the aircraft requiring 6 weeks of repairs but returning to combat. The 56th Fighter Group's engineering officer, Captain Barney Wazowicz, documented the damage patterns. Most strikes concentrated on engine and cockpit areas where German pilots expected maximum effect. The R2800 engine proved capable of running with up to 3 cylinders completely destroyed. Oil loss could be managed by reducing power and increasing cooling airflow. The turbo supercharger, mounted in the rear fuselage, was protected by the pilot's armor and fuel tanks. Only direct hits with 30mm cannon shells reliably destroyed P-47s, and few German fighters carried such heavy weapons. The mathematics of survival were compelling. By December 1943, the 56th Fighter Group had flown 5,847 combat sorties. Aircraft lost to enemy action, 56. Pilots killed in action, 34. Loss rate per sortie, 0.96%. By comparison, Luftwaffe fighter units operating against American bomber formations suffered loss rates exceeding 15% per mission. The attrition equation was unsustainable for German forces. Technical analysis revealed the sources of P-47 survivability. The R2800 engine's architecture provided inherent redundancy. 2 rows of 9 cylinders each, dual magnetos providing independent ignition. 2 separate oil systems. Even with major damage, partial power remained available. The engine's frontal area, while creating drag, also provided protection for the pilot. Bullets had to penetrate 6 feet of engine before reaching the cockpit. The airframe structure exceeded contemporary standards. Wing spars capable of sustaining 12 G loads. Control cables duplicated with emergency backup systems. Fuel tanks protected by armor plating and self-sealing rubber layers. Ammunition magazines positioned to avoid sympathetic detonation. every system designed with combat damage in mind. Republic Aviation's production line at Farmingdale, Long Island, manufactured P-47s at unprecedented rates. Peak production reached 16 aircraft per day. Total production would exceed 15,683 aircraft, more than any other American fighter. The industrial mathematics overwhelmed German defensive capabilities. For every P-47 destroyed, 10 more entered combat. Pilot training programs produced qualified aviators faster than combat attrition eliminated them. By spring 1944, P-47 groups had achieved aerial superiority over Western Europe. The kill ratio reached 4.6 to 1 in favor of American pilots. But the true measure of success lay in bomber protection. Before long-range fighter escort, bomber losses exceeded 10% per mission. With P-47 protection, losses dropped below 2%. The mathematical difference represented thousands of aircrew lives saved. Major General William Kepner, commander of the 8th Fighter Command, recognized the P-47's unique contribution. The Thunderbolt proved that survivability was as important as performance. A pilot who knows his aircraft can absorb tremendous punishment fights with greater confidence and aggression. The psychological advantage was incalculable. German assessments confirmed American conclusions. Luftwaffe General Adolf Galland wrote in his post-war memoirs, "The P-47 was a flying tank. Our pilots learned to avoid extended engagements with Thunderbolts unless they possessed overwhelming tactical advantage. The American fighters seemed to violate the laws of physics, continuing to fly with damage that would destroy any German aircraft." The evolution of tactics reflected mechanical realities. Colonel Hubert Zemke developed the Zemke fan formation, exploiting the P-47's survivability to create flexible escort patterns. Instead of maintaining close formation with bombers, P-47s ranged ahead and to the flanks, intercepting German fighters before they reached the bomber stream. The tactic required aircraft capable of sustaining damage during independent operations. Only the P-47 possessed sufficient durability. The Zemke fan's effectiveness was demonstrated on February 11, 1944. The 56th Fighter Group, operating independently ahead of the bomber formation, intercepted 60 German fighters assembling for attack. In the resulting combat, P-47s claimed 17 victories against 2 losses. Several damaged Thunderbolts flew home with battle damage that would have destroyed conventional fighters. Lieutenant Roach's aircraft returned with the entire left elevator shot away. Captain Gabreski landed with his engine running on 12 cylinders and the cowling peppered with cannon holes. Francis Gabreski would become the leading American ace in Europe with 28 aerial victories, all scored in P-47s. His aircraft survived multiple incidents of severe battle damage. On November 26, 1943, a 20mm cannon shell exploded in his turbo-supercharger at 30,000 feet. The engine lost all boost pressure. Gabreski glided 80 miles to reach friendly territory, the R-2800 engine maintaining just enough power to prevent a forced landing in enemy territory. The ground attack mission revealed another dimension of P-47 survivability. Operating at low altitude against heavily defended targets, Thunderbolts faced concentrated anti-aircraft fire. Light flak, 20mm and 37mm, fired at rates exceeding 120 rounds per minute. Heavy flak, 88mm, created lethal bursts at predetermined altitudes. The mathematics of survival seemed impossible, yet P-47s consistently returned from ground attack missions that would have been suicide for other aircraft. On December 23, 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, the 56th Fighter Group flew ground support missions in weather that grounded most aircraft. Visibility less than 1 mile. Cloud base at 400 feet. P-47s attacked German armoured columns at minimum altitude. Captain Robert Brooking's aircraft took 87 hits from small arms and automatic weapons. He flew home with cylinders missing, oil streaming from the cowling, and controls barely responding. The aircraft was repaired and flew again 3 days later. The 9th Air Force, specializing in tactical ground support, documented P-47 battle damage statistics. Between June 6, 1944 and May 8, 1945, Thunderbolts flew 135,000 ground attack sorties. Aircraft damaged by enemy fire, 4,293. Aircraft destroyed, 824. Survival rate after sustaining battle damage, 80.8%. No other aircraft matched this survivability rate in the ground attack role. Lieutenant Colonel Kinnard's experience on January 1, 1945, exemplified P-47 resilience. Attacking a German train, his aircraft hit high-tension wires. The propeller blades were bent. The engine cowling was crushed. The oil cooler was destroyed. Kinnard flew 40 miles to base with the engine overheating critically, landing just as it seized completely. The aircraft required an engine change but returned to combat within a week. The cumulative effect on German forces was devastating. P-47s claimed 86,000 railway cars destroyed, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armoured vehicles, 68,000 trucks. The transportation infrastructure supporting German forces collapsed, not from precision bombing at high altitude, but from P-47s absorbing ground fire that would have destroyed conventional attack aircraft and pressing home their attacks regardless. The Pacific Theatre provided different challenges but similar results. P-47s operating from bases in the Philippines faced Japanese anti-aircraft fire and fighter opposition. The theatre's vast distances made engine reliability critical. A single engine failure meant ditching in shark-infested waters. Yet P-47s achieved the lowest loss rate of any fighter type in the Pacific. The R-2800 engine's reliability, even when damaged, saved countless pilots from water landings. Colonel Neil Kirby, commanding the 348th Fighter Group, demonstrated P-47 combat effectiveness in the Pacific. On October 11, 1943, leading 4 P-47s, he encountered 36 Japanese aircraft. In the ensuing combat, Kirby personally destroyed 6 enemy aircraft. His Thunderbolt absorbed multiple hits from Japanese 7.7mm and 12.7mm machine guns, but continued flying. Kirby would score 22 victories before being shot down on March 5, 1944, when overwhelming numbers finally succeeded where individual combat could not. The Japanese designated the P-47 the Monster for its size and apparent indestructibility. Japanese pilot training manuals emphasized avoiding combat with P-47s unless possessing numerical superiority. The standard Japanese tactic of hitting and running proved ineffective. Brief firing passes failed to inflict sufficient damage. Extended combat exposed Japanese fighters to the P-47's devastating firepower. Production statistics revealed industrial dominance. Republic Aviation's Farmingdale plant covered 2.5 million square feet. Employment peaked at 24,000 workers. The Evansville, Indiana plant added additional capacity. Together, they manufactured more P-47s than Germany produced fighters of all types combined. The mathematical reality was stark. American industrial capacity, combined with aircraft survivability, created an insurmountable advantage. Cost analysis proved equally revealing. A P-47D cost approximately $85,000 in 1944 dollars. A trained pilot represented an investment of $75,000 in training costs. The combination totaled $160,000. If a P-47's survivability saved even one pilot from death or capture, the investment was justified. Over the course of the war, P-47 survivability saved hundreds of pilots who would have been lost in less robust aircraft. The 56th Fighter Group ended the war as the highest-scoring American fighter group in Europe, with 677.5 aerial victories. All achieved with P-47s, despite pressure to convert to P-51 Mustangs. The group's commander, Colonel David Schilling, stated, We stayed with the Thunderbolt because our pilots trusted it absolutely. They knew that no matter how badly damaged, the P-47 would probably get them home. Individual survival stories accumulated into legend. Lieutenant Quince Brown's P-47 collided with a Focke-Wulf 190 on February 8, 1944. 3 feet of his right wing was torn away. The engine cowling was crushed. The propeller was bent. Brown flew 200 miles to base and landed successfully. The aircraft was repaired and returned to service. The German pilot was killed in the collision. Captain Johnson McGinn survived a direct hit from an 88mm anti-aircraft shell on March 24, 1945. The shell passed through his right wing without detonating, leaving a hole large enough for a man to crawl through. McGinn flew home with the wing flexing visibly with each control input. Republic engineers studied the damage, amazed that the wing structure held. They calculated that any other fighter would have suffered catastrophic structural failure. The technological lessons influenced post-war aircraft design. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, developed in the 1970s, explicitly drew inspiration from P-47 survivability. Redundant hydraulic systems, armor protection for critical components, engines mounted high to avoid ground fire. The design philosophy traced directly to lessons learned from P-47 combat experience. Veterans' accounts consistently emphasized trust in their aircraft. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Baszler, "Flying the P-47, I never worried about the airplane failing me. Engine problems, battle damage, system failures. The Thunderbolt handled them all. That confidence let me focus on fighting rather than worrying about survival." German veterans provided contrasting perspectives. Luftwaffe ace Heinz Baer, with 220 victories. The P-47 was our most frustrating opponent. We would score hits that should destroy any aircraft, watch pieces fly off, see smoke and flames, yet the Thunderbolt would continue flying and often shoot back accurately. It defied our understanding of combat damage. The maintenance perspective proved equally important. Crew Chief Sergeant Anthony Garzino serviced P-47s throughout the European campaign. We'd see Thunderbolts return with damage that seemed impossible. Cylinders shot off, oil lines severed, control cables hanging by threads. We'd work all night, and the plane would fly again next day. The P-47 was designed to be fixed, not just flown. Statistical analysis confirmed anecdotal evidence. The 56th Fighter Group's maintenance records showed 73% of damaged aircraft returned to service within 72 hours. Major structural repairs were completed within 2 weeks. Only complete destruction or loss over enemy territory permanently eliminated aircraft from inventory. This repair rate was unprecedented in combat aviation. The supply chain supporting P-47 operations demonstrated industrial warfare at its peak. Pratt & Whitney produced 125,000 R2-8000 engines during the war. Each engine contained 2,800 individual parts. The supply system delivered engines, spare parts, ammunition, and fuel across global distances. A damaged P-47 in England could receive replacement parts manufactured in Connecticut within 10 days. Ammunition consumption revealed the scale of P-47 operations. Each Thunderbolt carried 3,400 rounds of T-50 caliber ammunition when fully loaded. The 56th Fighter Group alone expended over 10 million rounds during the war. Each round had to be manufactured, shipped, and loaded. The logistical achievement matched the combat success. The human dimension transcended statistics. Behind every survival story was a pilot who lived because his aircraft absorbed punishment that would have killed him in any other fighter. Multiplied across thousands of missions, the P-47's survivability represented thousands of families who welcomed their fathers, sons, and husbands home after the war. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabreski, the top-scoring P-47 ace, summarized the aircraft's impact. "The P-47 gave us the confidence to engage superior numbers, attack heavily defended targets, and push our attacks home regardless of damage. We knew the Thunderbolt would take care of us if we took care of it. That mutual trust between man and machine won the air war. The final statistics were compelling. 15,683 P-47s manufactured, 3,499 lost to all causes in combat, 746,000 combat sorties flown, 4.6 to 1 aerial kill ratio, 0.7% loss rate per sortie. Behind these numbers lay the fundamental truth. The P-47 Thunderbolt's unprecedented survivability changed the mathematics of aerial warfare. By war's end, German pilots had developed a grudging respect bordering on fear for the P-47. Luftwaffe training documents from early 1945 stated, "Avoid engagement with P-47 formations unless possessing overwhelming numerical superiority and tactical advantage. If engaged, attempt to damage the oil cooling system or turbo supercharger intake. Do not expect single hits to destroy the aircraft." The American Thunderbolt has proven capable of sustaining damage that would destroy any German fighter. The legacy extended beyond combat statistics. The P-47 proved that aircraft design philosophy could prioritize survivability without sacrificing combat effectiveness. Previous fighter designs emphasized performance above all else. The Thunderbolt demonstrated that keeping pilots alive was as important as shooting down enemies. This philosophy would influence military aviation for decades. Test pilot reports from Republic Aviation revealed the engineering decisions behind P-47 survivability. Every component was overbuilt by contemporary standards. Wing spars designed for 12G loads when 9G was considered adequate. Control cables doubled in thickness, fuel lines routed through protected channels, engine mounts reinforced to survive crash landings. The weight penalty was accepted as the price of survival. The Thunderbolt's size, initially seen as a disadvantage, proved to be an asset. The large fuselage provided space for armor protection, redundant systems, and structural reinforcement. The massive engine served as frontal armor. The wide-track landing gear enabled safe landings with tire damage. Every apparent weakness contained hidden strengths. Combat evolved to exploit P-47 advantages, dive attacks from altitude, using the Thunderbolt's exceptional diving speed of over 500 miles per hour. Zoom climbs after attacks, converting speed back to altitude. Head-on passes where the R2800 engine provided protection. These tactics required an aircraft capable of sustaining damage during aggressive maneuvering. The industrial story paralleled the combat narrative. Republic Aviation transformed from a small company producing 30 aircraft monthly in 1941 to an industrial giant producing 500 monthly by 1944. The workforce expanded from 3,000 to 24,000 employees. Manufacturing techniques evolved to support mass production while maintaining quality standards that pilots' lives depended upon. Quality control at Republic Aviation was legendary. Every engine was test run for 8 hours before installation. Every aircraft was test flown before delivery. Manufacturing defects that might cause combat failures were ruthlessly eliminated. Workers understood that their craftsmanship directly affected pilot survival. Signs throughout the factory reminded employees, "A pilot's life depends on your work." The learning curve was steep but successful. Early P-47Bs suffered from engine problems, radio failures, and canopy malfunctions. Each problem was systematically identified and corrected. By the P-47D model, reliability had improved dramatically. The P-47D-25 and later versions incorporated lessons learned from thousands of combat missions. Survival features were continuously refined based on battle damage analysis. Pilot training evolved to exploit P-47 capabilities. The aircraft's weight and power required different flying techniques than lighter fighters. Energy management became critical. Maintaining speed in combat, using vertical maneuvers rather than horizontal turning battles, trusting the aircraft to absorb damage while pressing attacks. Training programs at bases from Bradley Field, Connecticut, to Millville, New Jersey, produced pilots capable of maximizing P-47 advantages. The contrast with German aircraft was stark. The Messerschmitt Bf-109's liquid-cooled engine failed with single coolant system hits. The Focke-Wulf FW-190's BMW 801 radial was more robust but still vulnerable to oil system damage. Neither possessed the armor protection, redundant systems, or structural strength of the P-47. German pilots fought knowing that serious damage meant death or capture. Intelligence assessments confirmed the psychological impact. Intercepted German communications revealed growing pilot reluctance to engage P-47 formations. Luftwaffe morale declined as pilots witnessed seemingly destroyed Thunderbolts continue flying, while their own aircraft fell to single bursts of .50 caliber fire. The term Thunderbolt fever appeared in German medical reports, describing anxiety disorders among pilots assigned to intercept P-47s. The Pacific Theater provided different validation. Operating over vast ocean distances, engine reliability meant survival. The R-2800's ability to run despite damage proved crucial when the nearest friendly base was 500 miles away. Navy pilots flying Grumman F-6F Hellcats and Vought F-4U Corsairs, also powered by R-2800 engines, reported similar survivability advantages. Maintenance crews developed remarkable expertise. They repaired damage that seemed irreparable by conventional standards. Cylinder replacements in forward airfields. Control surface reconstruction using salvaged materials. Engine overhauls under combat conditions. The P-47's design facilitated field repairs that would have required factory facilities for other aircraft. The spare parts system was revolutionary. Republic Aviation established part numbering systems that became industry standards. Every component was catalogued, tracked, and distributed based on usage patterns. High-wear items were pre-positioned at forward bases. The result was unprecedented aircraft availability rates exceeding 80%, despite continuous combat operations. Combat photography documented the reality of P-47 survivability. Gun camera footage showed Thunderbolts absorbing streams of cannon fire while maintaining controlled flight. Post-mission photography revealed aircraft that seemed impossible to fly. Wings with gaping holes, fuselages resembling colanders, engines with cylinders blown completely away. Yet these aircraft had returned to base under their own power. The cost-benefit analysis was overwhelmingly positive. A P-47 that survived severe damage saved not only the pilot, but the investment in training and experience. Veteran pilots were irreplaceable assets. Their survival meant continued combat effectiveness. The Luftwaffe's loss of experienced pilots, by contrast, created a downward spiral of declining capability. Weather operations demonstrated another survivability advantage. The P-47's robust construction enabled operations in conditions that grounded other aircraft. Ice accumulation that would destroy lighter aircraft was manageable. Turbulence that would cause structural failure was absorbed. Rain and mud that made operations impossible for German aircraft were routine for Thunderbolts. Night operations, though limited, proved feasible. P-47s equipped with exhaust flame dampeners and basic night-flying instruments conducted intruder missions over German airfields. The aircraft's stability and predictable handling characteristics made it suitable for instrument flight. Several pilots survived night combat damage that would have been fatal in aircraft requiring more precise control. The culmination came during the Rhine crossings of March 1945. P-47s flew continuous ground support missions in the face of desperate German resistance, concentrated flak batteries, emergency Luftwaffe fighter sorties, man-portable anti-aircraft weapons. The Thunderbolts absorbed unprecedented damage while maintaining operational tempo. Not a single Allied unit reported failure of air support due to P-47 losses. Colonel Zemke, reflecting on his command of the 56th Fighter Group, stated, "The P-47 changed the fundamental equation of air combat. Previously, the aircraft with superior performance held advantage. The Thunderbolt proved that survivability could overcome performance disadvantages. Our pilots learned they could accept battle damage that would destroy our enemies and continue fighting. That psychological edge was decisive." The numbers told the story. By May 8, 1945, P-47s had flown more combat sorties than any other American fighter. They had dropped more bombs, fired more rockets, and destroyed more ground targets. Most importantly, they had brought more pilots home alive despite sustaining battle damage that defied conventional understanding of aircraft survivability. German ace Adolf Galland's final assessment was telling. The P-47 was not the best-performing Allied fighter. The Spitfire turned better. The P-51 had longer range. The P-38 had better visibility. But the P-47 was the fighter we feared most because it could not be stopped. Our pilots called it the unbreakable. In the end, that quality proved decisive. The last P-47 combat mission in Europe was flown on May 7, 1945. Appropriately, the aircraft returned with battle damage, 23 bullet holes from German flak. The pilot was uninjured. The aircraft would have flown again if the war had continued. It was a fitting final demonstration of the quality that had stunned German pilots throughout the conflict. The P-47 Thunderbolt's ability to survive everything. The legacy lived on in pilot memoirs, technical manuals, and design philosophies. Every modern military aircraft incorporates lessons learned from P-47 combat experience. Redundant systems, damage tolerance, armor protection, structural overdesign. The principles that saved thousands of Allied pilots continue protecting military aviators today. In the final analysis, the P-47 Thunderbolt represented more than just successful aircraft design. It embodied the American industrial philosophy of overwhelming material superiority combined with innovative engineering. It proved that technology could provide decisive advantage when properly applied. Most importantly, it demonstrated that prioritizing pilot survival was not just humanitarian, but strategically essential. The German pilots who faced P-47s in combat never forgot the experience. In post-war interviews, veteran after veteran described the shock of seeing Thunderbolts absorb damage that would destroy any aircraft in their experience and continue fighting effectively. The psychological impact of facing an apparently indestructible opponent contributed significantly to the Luftwaffe's ultimate defeat. The statistics were staggering, but the human story was more important. Behind every number was a pilot who survived because American engineers had built an aircraft that refused to die. Families reunited, children who grew up with fathers, communities that welcomed home their heroes. The true victory of the P-47 Thunderbolt was measured not in enemy aircraft destroyed, but in American lives saved. The Thunderbolt had proven that in the brutal mathematics of aerial warfare, survivability could be as decisive as firepower or performance. German pilots had been stunned to discover that their opponents flew aircraft that seemed to violate the fundamental laws of aviation physics. The P-47 absorbed punishment that should have been fatal and kept flying, kept fighting, kept bringing its pilots home. That was the legacy of the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. Not just victory, but survival. Not just air superiority, but the preservation of trained aircrew who would continue fighting until the enemy was defeated. In the skies over Europe and the Pacific, the Thunderbolt had written its legend in armor steel and American determination. It was, quite simply, the fighter that survived everything.